The stagecoach rolled into Concordia, Kansas on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, wheels kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the air like a veil between earth and sky. And Dalton Irving watched from the porch of his ranch house as it came to a rattling stop near the edge of his property, instead of continuing on to town. Something was wrong. Coaches never stopped here unless there was trouble, and trouble was the last thing he needed with the cattle drive coming up in 3 weeks and half his hands still recovering from that fever that had swept through the bunkhouse. He set down the harness he had been mending and stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the weathered planks as he squinted toward the coach. The driver was climbing down, waving frantically in his direction, and Dalton felt his gut tighten with the instinct that came from years of reading situations before they turned deadly. He stepped off the porch and started walking, his boots crunching on the dry grass that desperately needed rain. The August heat was oppressive, the kind that made every breath feel like drawing fire into your lungs, and he could see the horses were lathered and exhausted. As he got closer, the driver, a man named Pete Holloway who had been running this route for years, hurried toward him. "Mr. Irving, thank God. We got a situation here," Pete said, his weathered face lined with concern. "Got a woman inside, came all the way from St. Louis. Says she was supposed to meet her intended here in Concordia, but when we got to town and asked around, nobody knows nothing about any bridegroom waiting for her. She's got a baby with her, can't be more than a few months old, and the little thing has been crying for the last 20 miles. The woman's at her wit's end, and I did not have the heart to just leave her at the hotel with no money and no prospects." Dalton's jaw tightened. He had heard stories like this before, mail-order brides who traveled across the country based on promises that turned out to be lies, or men who changed their minds, or worse, men who never existed at all. She got a name for this man who was supposed to meet her. Says his name was Robert Caldwell, supposed to own a mercantile in town. I asked at the general store, the saloon, even the church. Nobody ever heard of him. Dalton swore under his breath. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and he could hear the thin, exhausted wail of an infant coming from inside the coach. "Let me talk to her." Pete nodded, relief evident on his face as he led Dalton to the coach door. Through the window, Dalton could see a young woman holding a baby, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, the hollow look of someone whose last hope had just crumbled to dust. Pete opened the door and the woman looked up, her eyes meeting Dalton's. They were blue-gray, like storm clouds, and held a mixture of desperation and defiant pride that struck something in his chest. "Madam, I'm Dalton Irving. This is my ranch. Pete here tells me you've run into some trouble." The woman straightened her shoulders despite her obvious exhaustion. She was probably in her mid-20s, with dark honey-colored hair that had come loose from its pins and a face that would have been pretty if it were not etched with worry and fatigue. The baby in her arms was red-faced and screaming, tiny fists flailing. "My name is Sarah Miller. I came here to marry Robert Caldwell. He wrote to me for 6 months, sent me money for passage, told me he had a business here and a home ready for me and my daughter. But he is not here, and apparently he never was." Her voice was steady, but Dalton could hear the tremor underneath, the effort it took to hold herself together. The baby's cries intensified and Sarah tried to soothe her, rocking her gently, but the infant was beyond consolation, probably hungry or sick from the journey or both. "How long since the baby ate?" Dalton asked. Sarah's cheeks flushed. "I have been trying, but she will not take it. I think the heat and the travel, she is just too upset. And I am so tired I do not think I have much milk left anyway." Dalton made a decision, the kind he made quickly because overthinking never helped anyone. "Pete, you head on to town. Madam, you and the baby come up to the house. It is cooler inside and we can figure out what to do from there. You need rest and that baby needs to calm down." Sarah's eyes widened. "I could not possibly impose. I do not even know you." "You do not have a lot of options right now," Dalton said, his tone gentler than his words. "And that baby is suffering. Come on, we will sort this out." For a moment, Sarah just looked at him, and Dalton saw her weighing her choices, measuring him for danger or decency. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Pete helped her down from the coach, and Dalton reached for her carpet bag and a small trunk that contained what he assumed were all her worldly possessions. The weight of them told him she had not had much to begin with. Sarah clutched the baby, who was still wailing, and followed him toward the house. The walk seemed longer than it was, the baby's cries cutting through the hot afternoon air like a knife. When they reached the porch, Dalton held the door open, and Sarah stepped into the relative coolness of the interior. The house was simple but well kept, a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, 2 bedrooms and a loft. It had belonged to his parents before they died, and Dalton had never seen much reason to change it. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the rocking chair near the window where a faint breeze sometimes made its way through. Sarah sank into it gratefully, still trying to soothe the baby. The little girl's face was blotchy and wet with tears, her cries taking on a desperate edge that tugged at something deep in Dalton's chest. He had been around newborn calves and colts his whole life, knew that sound an animal made when it was past the point of being able to help itself. "Let me," he said, moving closer. Sarah looked up at him with surprise and uncertainty. "I've dealt with plenty of orphaned animals. Babies are not that different when they get this worked up. Sometimes they just need a different touch." Sarah hesitated, then slowly extended the baby toward him. Dalton took the little girl carefully, feeling the fragile weight of her in his large, calloused hands. She was so small, impossibly small, her tiny body rigid with distress. He held her against his chest, one hand supporting her head, the other cradling her bottom, and began to rock gently, swaying side to side with an instinctive rhythm. "Esich now," he murmured, his deep voice low and steady. "You are all right. Nobody is going to hurt you. Just settle down now." He kept rocking, kept murmuring, and slowly, incredibly, the baby's cries began to quiet. Her rigid body softened, her flailing fists uncurled, and she turned her face against his chest, making small, hiccuping sounds. Dalton continued the gentle swaying, talking to her in that same low, soothing voice, and within a few minutes, the baby's eyes drooped, her breathing evening out into sleep. Dalton looked up to find Sarah staring at him with an expression he could not quite read, something between wonder and grief. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and unchecked. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I have been trying to do that for hours, and you just—" Her voice broke. "You are exhausted," Dalton said quietly, still rocking the baby. "When was the last time you slept?" "I do not know. St. Louis, maybe." 2 days ago. Sarah wiped at her face with trembling hands. "I thought when we got here everything would be all right. I thought we would finally have a home. I am such a fool." "You are not a fool for believing someone," Dalton said. "You are just unlucky. There is a difference." He looked down at the sleeping baby, so peaceful now, her tiny rosebud mouth slightly open. "What is her name?" "Emma. She is 4 months old, and her father—" Sarah's face hardened. "Dead. He died in a factory accident before she was born. We had no savings, no family to help. I tried to make it work, but St. Louis is expensive, and I could not work and care for her at the same time. When Robert's letters started coming, it seemed like a miracle. A chance for Emma to grow up somewhere safe, with a father and a real home. She laughed bitterly. I should have known it was too good to be true. Dalton kept rocking Emma, his mind turning over the situation. The smart thing would be to let Sarah rest here tonight, then help her get settled at the hotel in town while she figured out her next move. Maybe she could find work, though jobs for women with babies were scarce, especially in a small town like Concordia. More likely, she would end up having to go back east if she could even afford the passage. But looking at her now, at the exhaustion and desperation in her face, at the way her eyes kept closing even as she tried to stay awake, something shifted in him. He thought of his empty house, of the cooking and cleaning he did himself because he had never found a woman who fit into this rough life. He thought of the loneliness that sometimes hit him in the evenings when the work was done and there was nothing but silence. And he thought of this baby sleeping against his chest, trusting and peaceful, and her mother who had come all this way believing in a promise that turned out to be a lie. "Sleep now," he said to Sarah, his voice firm but kind. "You are home." Sarah's eyes flew open. "What?" "You came here to marry and make a life. The man who promised you that was a liar, but the need is still there on both sides. You need a home and a husband, and I need a wife. We can help each other." Sarah stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You cannot be serious. You do not know me. You do not know anything about me. I know you are a mother trying to take care of her child. I know you have the courage to travel halfway across the country on faith. I know you are strong enough to hold yourself together when everything falls apart. That is more than a lot of marriages start with. But this is insane. I just met you. You were willing to marry Robert Caldwell, and you only knew him through letters that turned out to be lies. At least I'm real, and I am making you an honest offer." Dalton kept his voice low to avoid disturbing Emma. "I am not saying it has to be love or even romance. I am saying we could make a practical arrangement that benefits us both. You and Emma get a home and security. I get help running this place and someone to share the work and the life. We see how it goes, and if it does not work, we figure something else out. But you need a place to land right now, and I am offering." Sarah's face was a tumult of emotions, hope and fear and disbelief warring with each other. "Why would you do this? You do not owe me anything." "Maybe I am tired of being alone," Dalton said simply. "Maybe I see a chance for something better than what I have, same as you did when you got on that stagecoach. Maybe I just do not like seeing people suffer when I can do something about it." The room fell silent except for Emma's soft breathing. Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter, then back at Dalton, her storm cloud eyes searching his face for something, truth or danger or hope. "If I said yes," she began slowly, "what would you expect from me?" "I would expect you to help run the household, to be a partner in making this ranch work. I would expect honesty and respect. As for the rest, the personal side of marriage, that would be up to you. I am not going to force anything on you. We would take it as slow as you need." Sarah closed her eyes, and Dalton saw her swaying slightly with exhaustion. She was going to fall out of the chair if she did not lie down soon. "You need to rest before you make any decisions," he said. "Come on. You can take my bedroom. I will sleep in the loft. I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will. Emma too. Go on now before you collapse." He carefully transferred the sleeping baby back to Sarah's arms. Emma stirred but did not wake, settling against her mother with a soft sigh. Sarah stood unsteadily, and Dalton put a hand under her elbow to steady her, guiding her to the bedroom. The room was simple, just a bed with a quilt his mother had made, a dresser and a washstand. But it was clean and cool, and Sarah looked at the bed like it was paradise. "Just rest," Dalton said. "We will talk more when you wake up." Sarah nodded, already lowering herself and Emma onto the bed. Within seconds they were both asleep, Sarah curled protectively around her daughter. Dalton stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Then he quietly closed the door and went back outside to finish his work. The rest of the afternoon passed in the familiar rhythm of ranch chores. Dalton mended the harness, checked on the horses, inspected the fences in the near pasture where some of the cattle were grazing. His mind kept drifting back to the house, to the woman and baby sleeping inside, to the offer he had made. It had been impulsive, not like him at all. He was usually the careful one, the planner, the man who thought things through. But something about Sarah's situation had bypassed all his usual caution and gone straight to his gut. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple when he finally headed back to the house. Inside, everything was quiet. He checked the bedroom door and found it still closed, so he set about making dinner, something simple, beans and cornbread and coffee. He was just pulling the cornbread from the oven when he heard the bedroom door open. Sarah emerged, her hair still mussed, her dress wrinkled but her eyes clearer than they had been. Emma was awake too, looking around with wide, curious eyes, no longer crying. "That smells wonderful," Sarah said softly. "It is nothing fancy, but it will fill you up. How are you feeling?" "Better. I did not realize how exhausted I was until I lay down." She looked around the room, taking in details she had been too tired to notice before. "Is Emma all right to just sit with me while we eat? Of course. Here, I will pull the chair closer to the table for you." They sat down together, an awkward domesticity settling over them. Dalton served the food, and Sarah ate like someone who had been forgetting to feed herself for days, which she probably had. Emma sat contentedly on her mother's lap, grasping at Sarah's finger and making soft cooing sounds. "I have been thinking about what you said," Sarah began after a few minutes. "About your offer." Dalton set down his coffee cup and waited. "I need to be honest with you," she continued, her voice steady but her eyes uncertain. "I do not have anything to offer you except work and whatever help I can provide. I am not a great cook, though I am willing to learn. I can sew and clean and manage a household on a tight budget because that is all I have ever known. But I do not have money or connections or anything else that would make me a good match. You have yourself, and that is enough. And you already have Emma, and she is worth more than any connection or dowry." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "You keep saying things like that, and I do not know what to do with it. Men do not usually," she stopped, shaking her head. "My husband, Emma's father, he was not a bad man, but he was not warm. He worked hard and he provided, but there was no softness in him. And then he died, and I thought maybe that was just how life was, hard and cold. But you have been kinder to me in 3 hours than most people were in all the time after Thomas died. Maybe you were just around the wrong people. Maybe." Sarah took a breath. "If I agree to this, to marrying you, I want to be clear about something. I will do my best to be a good wife. I will work hard and I will be loyal and I will help you however I can. But I need time before the other aspects of marriage. I am not ready for that yet. I already told you we go at your pace. I mean that. And Emma. She has to be part of this too. I will not marry anyone who does not want her or who would treat her as less than their own. Sarah, I held that baby this afternoon and rocked her to sleep, and it felt more right than just about anything I have done in years. I would be proud to be her father if you will let me." Sarah's face crumpled, and she covered it with one hand, her shoulders shaking. Dalton felt helpless, unsure if he should go to her or give her space. But then Sarah lowered her hand and she was smiling through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I must be insane, but yes." Dalton felt a surge of something he could not quite name, relief and anticipation and fear all mixed together. We should do it soon, properly. Tomorrow, if the preacher is available. That way there is no question about the arrangement. Tomorrow. Sarah laughed, a slightly wild sound. I came here expecting to get married, and I suppose I will. Just not to the man I thought. They finished dinner in a strange, charged silence, both of them aware that they had just committed to something enormous with someone they barely knew. After the dishes were cleared, Sarah excused herself to tend to Emma, who was starting to fuss again, and Dalton stepped out onto the porch to let them have privacy. The night had come on full, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The air had cooled slightly, though it was still warm, and Dalton could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. He thought about tomorrow, about standing in front of the preacher and promising his life to a woman he had met only hours ago. It should have terrified him, but instead he felt a strange calm, as if some part of him had been waiting for exactly this. Behind him he heard the door open and Sarah stepped out, Emma sleeping in her arms again. She finally settled, Sarah said softly. I think the food helped, and the rest. Good. Dalton gestured to the rocking chair. Sit for a minute. It is nice out here when the sun goes down. Sarah sat, cradling Emma carefully, and began to rock gently. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in a way that should not have been possible given the circumstances. Tell me about this place, Sarah said eventually. About your life here. So Dalton told her. He told her about growing up on this ranch, about his parents who had homesteaded here when Kansas was still raw territory, about how they had built everything from nothing. He told her about losing them both to influenza 5 years ago, about how he had kept the ranch going alone, building the herd, hiring hands when he could afford them, making a life out of sweat and stubbornness. He told her about the cattle drives to Dodge City, about the long winters and the spring calving season, about the constant work that was both exhausting and satisfying. In turn, Sarah told him about her life in St. Louis, about growing up in a boarding house run by her mother after her father died, about marrying Thomas Miller when she was 20 because he seemed steady and reliable, about the hard years of trying to make ends meet on a factory worker's wages. She told him about Thomas's death, about the months of struggling alone with a newborn, about the desperation that had made Robert Caldwell's letters seem like salvation. I kept his letters, Sarah said quietly. I suppose I should burn them, but part of me wants to know if he was even real. If any of it was real. It does not matter now, Dalton said. You are here and this is real. Tomorrow will be real. Sarah nodded, rocking Emma gently. The baby's face was peaceful in sleep, all the distress of the afternoon gone. She likes you, Sarah said. I have never seen her settle for anyone else the way she did for you this afternoon. She is a sweet little thing, easy to like. Not always. She has been crying so much lately, I thought maybe there was something wrong with her, but I think she was just picking up on my fear and my worry. Babies do that, you know. They feel what you feel. Then we will have to make sure she feels safe and happy from now on. Sarah looked over at him, her face shadowed in the darkness but her eyes catching the light from the lamp inside the house. You really mean all of this, do not you? This is not just some charitable impulse you are going to regret in the morning. I do not regret things I decide on purpose, Dalton said. And I decided on purpose to ask you to marry me. I will still mean it in the morning and the morning after that. I hope so, Sarah whispered. Because I am trusting you with everything I have. I know. I will not let you down. They sat together until Emma stirred and needed feeding, and then Sarah went back inside while Dalton stayed on the porch a while longer, thinking about the next day and all the days after. When he finally went in and climbed the ladder to the loft, he lay awake for a long time, listening to the soft sounds of Sarah moving around in his bedroom, the occasional murmur as she tended to Emma. It was strange having other people in his house, but it was a good strange, filling up spaces he had not realized were empty. Morning came early, as it always did on a ranch. Dalton was up before dawn, going through the usual routine of feeding the horses and checking on the cattle. When he came back to the house, Sarah was already awake, Emma on her hip, trying to figure out the kitchen. "I thought I would make breakfast," she said, a little helplessly, "but I cannot find anything." Dalton smiled, the first real smile in longer than he could remember. "Here, I will show you. We will do it together." They worked side by side, Sarah learning where things were kept, Dalton showing her how he liked his coffee, both of them navigating the strange intimacy of sharing space. Emma watched everything with bright, interested eyes, and occasionally let out a happy gurgle that made them both laugh. After breakfast, Dalton hitched the wagon, and they all rode into town together. Concordia was a small place, just one main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a hotel, and a few other businesses. People stopped to stare as Dalton helped Sarah down from the wagon, Emma in her arms, and he could see the speculation in their faces. By evening, the whole town would know he had brought home a woman and a baby. The church was a simple white building at the end of the street. Reverend Thomas was a kind man in his 50s who had known Dalton since childhood. When they walked in and Dalton explained the situation, the Reverend's eyebrows rose almost to his hairline. "You want to get married? Today? To a woman you met yesterday?" "Yes, sir." Reverend Thomas looked from Dalton to Sarah, who stood straight and dignified despite the worn condition of her traveling clothes. "Young lady, are you being coerced in any way?" "No, Reverend," Sarah said firmly. "Mr. Irving has offered me a way out of a terrible situation, and I am accepting it willingly. I would rather marry an honest man I barely know than face trying to survive on my own with my daughter." The Reverend sighed, but his expression was understanding. "These are hard times, and I will not judge the choices people make to survive. If you are both certain, I will perform the ceremony. But I want you to understand the seriousness of the vows you are about to take." "We understand," Dalton said. "Very well. Do you have rings?" Dalton had not thought of that, but Sarah spoke up quietly. "I have my old wedding ring from my first marriage. I can use that." Something about that made Dalton's chest tighten uncomfortably. "No, you should have a new ring for a new marriage. Reverend, can you give us an hour?" They left Emma with the Reverend's wife, a plump, cheerful woman named Martha who cooed over the baby, and Dalton led Sarah to the general store. Inside, the proprietor, a man named Henry Sutton, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. "Morning, Dalton. What can I do for you?" "I need to see your rings." Henry's eyebrows rose, but he pulled out a small tray of simple gold bands from under the counter. They were not fancy, just plain circles of gold, but they were new and unblemished. Dalton looked at Sarah. "Pick one." Sarah's fingers hovered over the tray, then selected a slim, delicate band. "This one." Dalton paid for it, ignoring Henry's obvious questions, and they walked back to the church. When they entered, Reverend Thomas and his wife were waiting, Martha still holding Emma, who seemed perfectly content. "Are we ready?" the Reverend asked. "We are ready," Dalton confirmed. They stood together in front of the simple altar, Sarah holding Emma now, Dalton beside them. Martha and Henry, who had followed them from the store, stood as witnesses. The Reverend opened his Bible and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Dalton, familiar from the handful of weddings he had attended, but suddenly weighted with new meaning. He glanced at Sarah and saw her holding Emma tightly, her face pale but determined. When it came time for the vows, Dalton spoke as clearly and firmly, meaning every word even if the situation was unconventional. Sarah's voice was softer but equally steady. "You have the ring?" Reverend Thomas asked. Dalton pulled it from his pocket and took Sarah's left hand. It was small and work-roughened, the hand of someone who had known hard labor. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Sarah looked down at it, then up at him, and something passed between them, an understanding or perhaps a promise that went beyond the words they had just spoken. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Dalton, you may kiss your bride." Dalton hesitated, unsure, but Sarah lifted her face slightly, giving permission. He leaned down and kissed her gently, briefly, their lips barely touching. It was chaste and awkward, but it was real, and when he pulled back, Sarah was blushing. "Congratulations," Reverend Thomas said, smiling. "May God bless your union and your family." They signed the papers, Martha and Henry adding their signatures as witnesses, and then it was done. Sarah Miller was now Sarah Irving, and Emma had a father and Dalton had a family. It had happened so fast, in less than 24 hours, but standing there in the church with his new wife and daughter, Dalton did not feel rushed. He felt right. They thanked the Reverend and Martha, endured Henry's enthusiastic congratulations and obvious curiosity, and then walked back out into the bright morning sunshine. The wagon was waiting and Dalton helped Sarah up, Emma in her arms, and they rode back to the ranch in silence, both of them processing what they had just done. When they reached the house, Dalton helped Sarah down, and they stood for a moment looking at the place that was now her home. "I know it is not much," Dalton said, "but we can make it better together." "It is wonderful," Sarah said softly. "It is more than I hoped for." They went inside, and the rest of the day passed in the strange adjustment of learning to live together. Sarah explored the house properly, figuring out where things were, what needed to be done. Dalton showed her the root cellar, the chicken coop, the barn, explaining the rhythms of the ranch. Emma was passed back and forth between them, and Dalton found himself growing increasingly comfortable holding her, talking to her, making her smile with silly faces. That evening, after dinner, they faced the question of sleeping arrangements. Dalton started to head for the loft, but Sarah stopped him. "You do not have to sleep up there. This is your house, your bed. I can take the loft. You are not climbing up and down a ladder with Emma in the middle of the night. Besides, I am used to the loft. It is fine." "Dalton." Sarah's voice was tentative. "We are married now. It would not be improper for us to share the bed. I mean, not for anything, just for sleeping, if you want." Dalton looked at her, saw the nervousness in her face, but also the offering of trust. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. We will keep Emma between us. It will be practical." So that night they lay down together in the big bed, Emma in her little drawer turned cradle beside them, and the awkwardness of it was almost overwhelming. Dalton lay rigid on his side, Sarah equally stiff on hers, a careful distance between them. But eventually exhaustion won out and they both slept. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Dalton worked the ranch and Sarah took over the household, learning as she went. She was not wrong about her cooking. It was basic at best, but she improved rapidly, and Dalton never complained. She kept the house cleaner than it had been in years, and she worked tirelessly, always with Emma nearby. The baby thrived in the new environment, growing plumper and happier, her cries decreasing as her contentment increased. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence, Emma between them. Dalton found himself looking forward to these times, to the easy companionship that was developing between them. Sarah asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle, about his plans, and her interest seemed genuine. In turn, she told him more about her life, her hopes for Emma, her slowly developing dreams for their future. At night, they shared the bed and gradually the stiffness eased. One night, about 2 weeks after their wedding, Dalton woke to find Sarah curled against his side, Emma on her other side, and Sarah's hand resting on his chest. She was deeply asleep, her breathing even and peaceful, and Dalton did not move, afraid to disturb her but also not wanting to. The weight of her hand, the warmth of her body, it felt good in a way he had not expected. In the morning, Sarah woke and realized where she was, pulling back quickly with a flushed face. "I am sorry, I did not mean, it is all right," Dalton said quietly. "It is all right." After that, the distance between them shrank a little more each night. Sarah stopped apologizing when she woke up close to him. Dalton found reasons to touch her during the day, a hand on her shoulder as he passed, help with lifting something heavy that brought them close together. The attraction was growing, building slowly like a fire carefully tended, and Dalton was content to let it grow at its own pace. A month after their wedding, the cattle drive to Dodge City was scheduled to begin. Dalton had been dreading this, not wanting to leave Sarah and Emma alone so soon, but the herd needed to go to market, and he had to lead his men. The night before he was set to leave, they sat on the porch as usual, but the mood was somber. "How long will you be gone?" Sarah asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Depends on the weather and how the cattle behave. That is a long time. I know. I talked to the Johnsons, our neighbors to the east. Martha Johnson said she would check on you every few days, and if you need anything, their son can ride over. You will not be completely alone. I am not worried about being alone. I am worried about you. I have heard stories about cattle drives, about stampedes and river crossings and outlaws. I have done this a dozen times. I will be careful. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she turned to look at him. "Dalton, if something happened to you, what would Emma and I do? I do not even know if this place would belong to us, or if we would be thrown out." Dalton had not thought of that. "I will go to the lawyer in town tomorrow morning before we leave. I will make sure everything is in your name too, so if something happens, you and Emma are protected." "Thank you." Sarah's voice was small. "I did not mean to sound mercenary. It is just practical. You have learned to think that way, and there is nothing wrong with it. I will take care of it." True to his word, Dalton rode into town before dawn and roused the lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson, from his bed. By the time the sun was fully up, the papers were signed, making Sarah and Emma co-owners of the ranch and ensuring they would inherit everything if Dalton died. It gave him peace of mind as he rode back to gather his men and start the drive. Sarah was waiting when he returned, Emma on her hip. The hands were already mounted, the cattle gathered and restless. Dalton rode up to the porch and dismounted. "Everything is taken care of," he said. "The papers are filed." "Be safe," Sarah said, and there were tears in her eyes. "Come back to us." Dalton stepped close and on impulse kissed her. Not the chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deeper, more real. Sarah's free hand came up to grip his shirt, and she kissed him back, and when they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I will come back," Dalton promised. "You are my home now. Both of you." He kissed Emma's forehead, mounted his horse, and rode out with his men, the cattle streaming ahead of them in a river of brown hides and clacking horns. He looked back once and saw Sarah still standing on the porch, watching him go, and it took all his willpower to keep riding. The drive was long and hard, everything a cattle drive always was. The days were hot and dusty, the nights cold and full of the sounds of restless cattle. They forded rivers, navigated rough terrain, dealt with a minor stampede triggered by a lightning storm. But through it all, Dalton found his thoughts returning to the ranch, to Sarah and Emma, to the life waiting for him there. It was different from previous drives when he had nothing to go back to except an empty house. Now, he had a reason to be careful, to make sure he survived. They reached Dodge City after 3.5 weeks on the trail. The cattle sold well, and Dalton collected payment, made arrangements for his men to be paid, and immediately started the journey home. Some of the hands wanted to stay in Dodge for a few days, enjoy the saloons and the entertainment, but Dalton was done. He wanted to get back. The ride home took a week, and with every mile, Dalton felt his anticipation growing. He wondered how Sarah and Emma were, if they were all right, if Sarah had managed on her own. He wondered if she had missed him the way he had missed her. He wondered if that kiss before he left had meant as much to her as it had to him. When the ranch finally came into view, Dalton urged his horse faster. The house looked good, the fences intact, smoke rising from the chimney. As he rode into the yard, the door flew open and Sarah ran out, her face lighting up with joy. "You are back. You are really back." Dalton dismounted and barely had time to drop the reins before Sarah threw herself into his arms, hugging him tightly. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her against him. She was shaking, and he realized she was crying. "Hey now, I am all right. I told you I would come back." "I know, but I was so worried. Every day felt like a year." Sarah pulled back slightly to look up at him. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too." Dalton cupped her face in his hands and kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation from either of them. Sarah kissed him back with a fervor that spoke of lonely nights and growing feelings, and when they finally broke apart, they were both flushed and breathless. "Where is Emma?" Dalton asked. "Asleep inside." "She has been doing so well, Dalton." "She is sleeping through the night now, and she smiles all the time. Come see." They went inside hand in hand, and Dalton looked around the house with fresh eyes. It was spotless, more homey than it had been when he left, with small touches that spoke of Sarah's presence. A vase of wildflowers on the table, curtains in the windows that had not been there before, Emma's little clothes hanging on a line near the stove. It looked like a home, not just a house. Emma was sleeping in the bedroom, and when Dalton leaned over to look at her, she had indeed grown, her face rounder, her body longer. She stirred and opened her eyes, and for a moment she just looked at him. Then her face split into a huge, gummy smile, and she reached up her arms. "She remembers you," Sarah said, wonder in her voice. "She actually remembers you." Dalton picked Emma up, and she gurgled happily, grabbing at his face with her little hands. Something fierce and protective surged in his chest, love so strong it almost hurt. This was his daughter now, in every way that mattered, and he would protect her and her mother with everything he had. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Dalton and Sarah sat on the porch together, closer than they had ever sat before. Dalton's arm was around Sarah's shoulders, and she was leaning into him, her head resting on his chest. "How was the drive?" she asked. "Long. Hot. Successful, though. We got a good price for the cattle, and I have enough to get us through the winter and then some." "I am glad." "I was worried about that, too." "You worry too much. I am a mother. Worrying is part of the job." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Dalton, this past month being here alone with Emma, taking care of the house, waiting for you to come back, it made me realize something." "What is that?" "This is not just a practical arrangement anymore, at least not for me. I know we married out of necessity, but somewhere along the way I started to care about you, really care. And when you were gone, I realized how much I had come to depend on you, not just for security but for companionship and kindness, and all the things I did not even know I was missing." Dalton's heart was pounding. "Sarah, let me finish. I do not know if you feel the same way. Maybe for you this is still just a practical thing, But I wanted you to know that if you ever wanted more, if you wanted a real marriage in every sense, I would be willing. I would be happy." Dalton turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Sarah, I have been half in love with you since the day you arrived. Watching you with Emma, working beside you, sleeping next to you every night and not being able to hold you the way I wanted to, it has been torture. I did not want to push you, did not want you to feel obligated, but if you are saying what I think you are saying, I am saying I want to be your wife in every way. I am saying I am falling in love with you too." Dalton kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Sarah responded with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, they were both trembling. "Come to bed with me," Sarah whispered. "Really come to bed with me." They went inside, checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully, and then went to the bedroom together. What followed was tender and hesitant at first, both of them navigating new intimacy, but it was also wonderful, a joining that felt inevitable and right. Afterward they lay tangled together, Sarah's head on Dalton's chest, his arms around her, and the last pieces of awkwardness between them dissolved. "I love you," Dalton said into the darkness. "I know it is fast, but I do." "I love you too," Sarah replied, "and it does not feel fast. It feels like it was always supposed to be this way." The months that followed were the happiest of Dalton's life. He and Sarah settled into married life fully, partners in every sense. They worked the ranch together, Sarah learning more every day, contributing ideas that often improved the way things ran. Emma grew and thrived, starting to crawl and then to pull herself up on furniture, her personality emerging bright and curious and joyful. As winter approached, Sarah began to suspect she was pregnant again. She told Dalton one evening in December, nervous and hopeful, and Dalton's reaction was pure joy. He swept her up and spun her around, careful not to jostle her too much, then knelt down and kissed her stomach. "We are going to have another baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked. "Happy does not even cover it. Sarah, you have given me everything. A family, a home, a reason to work toward the future. I could not be happier." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into the spring. Emma, now almost a year old, seemed to sense something was different and became even more attached to both her parents, especially Dalton. She would toddle after him, calling Papa in her high, sweet voice, and it never failed to make Dalton's heart swell. In late May, Sarah went into labor. The birth was hard, longer and more difficult than Emma's had been, and there were moments when Dalton was terrified he would lose her. But Martha Johnson, who had come to help, was experienced and capable. And finally, after hours of labor, their son was born. Dalton held the baby, a healthy, squalling boy with dark hair like his father, and felt tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. Sarah, exhausted but glowing, smiled up at him. What should we name him? They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, holding his son, Dalton thought of his father, the man who had built this ranch from nothing, who had taught him everything he knew. "What do you think of Daniel? Daniel Irving." "Daniel," Sarah repeated. "I love it. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to your family." Emma was brought in to meet her new brother, and she stared at him with wide eyes, reaching out a tentative finger to touch his tiny hand. "Baby," she said solemnly, and Dalton and Sarah both laughed through their tears. Life with two children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Dalton found himself stretched thin, trying to keep up with the ranch work while also helping with the babies, but he would not have changed it for anything. Sarah was tired too, nursing Daniel and chasing after Emma, but she was happy in a way she had never been before. One evening, when Daniel was about 3 months old and Emma was learning to talk in full sentences, Dalton came in from the barn to find Sarah sitting in the rocking chair with both children. Emma on one side, Daniel nursing on the other. She was singing softly, an old lullaby, and the scene was so peaceful and perfect that Dalton just stood in the doorway, taking it in. Sarah looked up and saw him watching. "What?" she asked, smiling. "I am just thinking about how different everything is from 2 years ago. How empty my life was and how full it is now. Do you ever regret it, taking us in, marrying a stranger? Never, not for 1 second. You are the best decision I ever made." Sarah's eyes grew misty. "You saved us, you know. If you had not offered me a place that day, I do not know what would have happened to Emma and me. We were at the very end of our rope." "You saved me too," Dalton said, moving to sit beside her. "I just did not know I needed saving until you arrived." As the years passed, the Irving family continued to grow and thrive. Emma grew into a bright, confident little girl who loved helping her father with the horses. Daniel was more serious, studious even as a toddler, fascinated by how things worked. 2 years after Daniel was born, Sarah had another baby, a girl they named Grace, who had her mother's storm cloud eyes and a temperament to match, fierce and determined from the start. The ranch prospered under Dalton and Sarah's combined efforts. They expanded the herd, improved the grazing land, built a new barn and a larger house with enough bedrooms for their growing family. They became pillars of the Concordia community, known for their hard work and their happy, boisterous family. Emma, who never remembered a time before Dalton was her father, grew up secure and loved, never knowing the desperation that had brought her mother to Kansas. Dalton never treated her differently from the children he had fathered, and as far as anyone in town knew, Emma was his by blood as well as by heart. When Emma was 10, Daniel 8, and Grace 6, they sat around the dinner table one evening, the chaos of the meal winding down. Emma was telling a story about school. Daniel was trying to sneak vegetables to the dog under the table, and Grace was chattering about the new calf that had been born that morning. Sarah caught Dalton's eye across the table and smiled, that private smile that was just for him. And Dalton felt the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt every day since she had stepped off that stagecoach. Later, after the children were in bed, Dalton and Sarah sat on the porch together, as they did almost every evening. The porch had been expanded when they built the new house, big enough for a swing that Dalton had made, and they sat on it now, swaying gently in the warm summer air. "Do you remember the first night we sat out here?" Sarah asked, her head on Dalton's shoulder. "I remember. You had just agreed to marry me, and we barely knew each other, and I was terrified I had made a huge mistake." "Had you? The best mistake of my life." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Sarah, more now than ever. I love you too. Thank you for giving me and Emma a home, for giving us everything. You gave me just as much. You gave me a reason to build something worth having." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside, their children slept safely, and the house Dalton had once rattled around in alone was filled with life and love. It had started with a crying baby and a desperate woman and an impulsive offer, but it had become something neither of them could have imagined that hot August day in 1878. Sarah had arrived in Concordia expecting to marry a stranger, and instead had found love. Dalton had expected to live out his life alone, and instead had found a family. And Emma, who had been born into hardship and loss, had been given a father who cherished her and a life full of security and joy. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations, and the ordinary rhythms of ranch life. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman, smart and capable, who eventually married the son of a neighboring rancher and built her own life while staying close to her family. Daniel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Dalton grew older, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. Grace, true to her fierce nature, became a teacher, determined to bring education to the children of the surrounding ranches. Dalton and Sarah grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down but their love never diminishing. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, the loss of friends and the joys of grandchildren, always together, always a team. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, they sat on the porch swing as they had done for decades. The ranch was being run primarily by Daniel now, with help from Emma's husband and some of Grace's students who worked part-time. Dalton and Sarah were enjoying a slower pace, spending their days on small projects and time with their grandchildren. "Do you ever think about that day I arrived?" Sarah asked, echoing the conversation they had had so many years ago. "I think about it all the time," Dalton replied. "I think about how close I came to just letting Pete take you to the hotel, to not getting involved. And I think about how empty my life would have been if I had made that choice. I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that Emma and I were going to end up destitute on the streets. And then you just offered us everything without expecting anything in return." "I expected plenty in return. I got it too, I got you." Sarah smiled and leaned closer to him. "You rocked us both to sleep that first day and told me I was home. Do you remember?" "I remember. You were right. This has been home, the truest home I have ever known. You made it so. We made it so. Together." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors it had been that first day nearly 40 years earlier. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family. Daniel and his wife preparing dinner, some of the grandchildren playing, the continuation of the life they had built. Dalton took Sarah's hand, the same hand he had put a ring on in that little church in Concordia, and brought it to his lips. The ring was worn now, scratched and dented from decades of hard work, but Sarah had never taken it off and neither had he removed his own. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for saying yes that day, for taking a chance on a stranger, for building this life with me." "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible," Sarah replied, "for loving Emma as your own, for being the man I did not know I was looking for." As the stars began to appear, one by one in the darkening sky, they continued to sit together, surrounded by the life they had created, the family they had built, the home they had made. The stagecoach that had brought Sarah and baby Emma to Kansas all those years ago was long gone. But what it had delivered had lasted, had grown, had become something beautiful and enduring. Their story had started with desperation and impulse, with a crying baby and a practical proposal. But it had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the chances you take, and the strangers who turn out to be exactly who you needed all along. Dalton had rocked them both to sleep and told Sarah she was home, and in doing so, he had found his own home too, in the love of a brave woman and the family they had built together in the wild Kansas plains. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was theirs, and it was everything.